My name is Anushka. You can find me elsewhere online as The Crimson Stitchery, such as on my website, thecrimsonstitchery.com, on Instagram, on Ravelry, and I'm coming to you here from a very sunny late April afternoon here in London. How are you doing? I hope that you are well. I am very pleased to be back here making another episode of The Crimson Stitchery for you guys, so I hope that you have something nice to drink and a project to work on and get settled in. In this episode, we're going back to vintage Crimson Stitchery style in that I'm going to be chatting with you about this jumper, which I've just finished making, which is my latest design, Cloudgazing. And I'm also going to do a little reading and discussion for you guys, which is something that I like to do every so often. I'm a really voracious reader. I'm also a humanities PhD student coming up to the end, thank goodness, so I do read quite a large variety of different types of texts, both fiction and non-fiction. And I do generally share a recommendation in my newsletter, which if you haven't done so already, please do make sure that you are signed up so that you don't miss anything there. I used to write my newsletters at the beginning of each month and it would be this really long missive with loads of information in it, but I've recently decided to separate out all of the different topics that I used to write about in each newsletter, just so it's a little bit less overwhelming for me to write and also hopefully less overwhelming for you guys to read. So yeah. I'm going to be trying to take more of a little but often approach, which, you know, is easier to get a bit more balance in that sense, which I'm sure you can appreciate that we are all looking for balance, or at least I am. So before I get into all of the content of this episode, I have to flag that this episode is coming to you courtesy of all of my lovely and wonderful supporters on Patreon who keep the Crimson Stitchery going through their monthly membership subscriptions. And May is going to be a particularly good time to join the Patreon if you've been thinking about it recently, because the next edition of my quarterly virtual stitch night is coming up, which is one of the perks that you get if you subscribe at any tier. I'm going to be hosting our virtual stitch night, which is basically like a group video call where we can get together, share our projects, spend a bit of time knitting and crocheting together and get to know each other a little bit more. It's a really lovely thing to do. People are super friendly and welcoming, and it's just a great way to make more knitty friends, as I like to call them. So if that's something that tickles your fancy, do head over to patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery to check out all of the different tiers and choose the right one for you. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, present and past, for supporting the Crimson Stitchery. I would not still be doing this without you guys. Moving on, I am recording on a Sunday afternoon and people are mowing their lawns, so if that doesn't get edited out in post-production, then I'm really sorry, but they've been going at it all day and I just can't put off recording any longer. But the main project that I've been working on over the last month since I last recorded is this incredible sweater that I'm wearing called Cloudgazing. And if you did watch the last episode, you will of course recognise it because it is my latest design and my newest knitting pattern, and it's going to be released in a couple of weeks' time. We're currently finishing up the test knit, which has been really wonderful. I'm so grateful to everybody who volunteered to be a test knitter. It was a little bit last minute this time, just because like it was very like go with all of the deadlines. So I appreciate, you know, that I appreciate everybody who like was up to just kind of drop everything and cast on this slightly mad but super fun sweater. So I finished my version now finally. I just need to give it a good block so that I can flatten out the neckline a little bit. But yeah, here it is in all of its glory. So I'm calling this one Cloudgazing because it's basically coming in as part of a collection that I'm working on, a design collection called Clouds and Rounds. And regular viewers will know that, you know, through the last couple of years, like I often have like a long running theme through my knitting, and for like a little while it was all about kind of herbalism and kind of learning about herbal remedies, and I kind of paired my knowledge that I was kind of amassing in that sphere and thought about how to interpret that through knitting or using knitting as a sort of learning tool. And I made 4 designs in that collection in the end, which are the oregano socks, salvia hat, Cicimbrium sweater and hawthorn tincture shawl. So they're all named after a pretty common herb, both wild herbs and culinary herbs in the UK. But my problem with designing, and let me know if you guys can relate to this in any way, is that I always just have 1,000,001 ideas, and it just takes me too long to execute. Like, I just can't seem to match up the speed at which I'm thinking and ideating and and designing, like on paper and sketching, with my pace at not only the knitting but all of the associated admin tasks to do with knitting, including writing up a pattern, doing like layouts and graphic design, organizing test knits. I'm definitely getting better at that, so thank you to the patience of all of my test knitters again. But I would really like to be kind of designing things and releasing them in more of a timely manner, and that's something that I've been having to, learn about in that sense, kind of all of the planning and all of that side of things, and just like exactly like admin really takes a long time because, for me, like the creative stuff, it comes so naturally and like so quickly, and I kind of have to like temper that energy because it's very easy for me to just run off in that direction. And then I kind of have to stop and think, like, if I actually want it to be released and out there in the world and out there for other knitters to make especially, then like I have to kind of do the balance of all of the other stuff, and then often it turns out that the exciting creative energy turns out to be like just the tip of the iceberg, and everything else is this like huge mass of admin under the surface. Yeah, it really is like an iceberg, unfortunately. So that's something that I'm getting better at over the years, and again, like, I can't say this enough, very much thanks to the support of you guys in my audience, and especially my Patreon supporters in my Discord, like just being really encouraging throughout and just giving me that time and space to learn, so that I can transfer like stuff out of my head into the world. But yeah, so what was I saying? Cloudgazing. So the herbalism collection just took me so long to pull together, and honestly, I could have done more designs. I released 4 in the end because I just had to like stop. But yeah, I could have done more. And then Clouds and Rounds, I've got 3 designs that I've you've actually seen them along the years. This is what I mean, things are taking me way too long. Clouds and Rounds is all about shapes, outlines, silhouettes, 2D shapes, 3D shapes. And so obviously here we've got these really glorious shaped sleeves, which are done in a very careful manner, because what I'm increasingly realizing is that for me, being interdisciplinary is extremely natural, and I can very easily sort of learn one thing or hear about one idea, and it's plastic, like it's in that it's malleable, and I can shape it, and I can move ideas around to different forms, and I can apply them in different situations and different scenarios very easily. But yeah, I'm increasingly realizing that often doesn't happen, not only in creative disciplines, in academic disciplines, but like in the world of work. I'm increasingly realizing that it's very easy to kind of stay within your discipline and only see how things are done within that. And for instance, when it comes to hand knitting, you're going through different disciplines. You've got the hand knitting world and craft, where it's kind of quote unquote amateur, or really that it's just been produced on a very small scale, small batches, generally 1-on-1. Then you've got the world of fashion, and you've got fashion knitwear and mass production, where obviously things are made in factories at big batch numbers. But then you've got the kind of equivalent for that. If you kind of flip out of knitting and you just go into garment making and garment sewing, you've then got sort of bespoke hand making methods that are more true of cloth, a sewn cloth, and then you've got mass production in terms of like fast fashion and all of the rest of it. And like there's elements from all of these where in these different spheres, where obviously there's so much crossover, but they all do things in a slightly different way. And the sphere that I personally have never worked in is fashion production on any kind of volume. I've always worked on a sort of very small scale level. Even when I have produced things in batches, it's been like a batch of 20, maybe a batch of 50. at the really upper end, and I'm talking about when I worked in the world of costume, basically, so you know, producing costumes for like a chorus, but generally I would be part of a team, you know. I wouldn't, well actually no, I have been the sole person responsible as well, but anyway, what I'm saying is there's loads of crossover, but there's also certain conventions that don't necessarily, people then don't kind of talk out of, like, look at what I'm doing with my hands. People don't necessarily go out of their boxes. And for me, it's very natural. What I'm trying to say is it's very natural to move and shift my knowledge around. So for instance, when it comes to making a shape like this sweater has, which is a dropped sleeve sweater, there's conventions that exist in knitting, which are that you knit a square or a kind of two squares, and then you pick up stitches around the armhole that are the same length of the squares, and so like the sort of height of the armhole is the width of the upper arm, and it's kind of it's optimistically geometric in that it's got this pleasing fantasy of, you know, geometric shapes perfectly aligning and meeting, but that's not how the human body functions. Whereas when you look at how to create this drop shoulder silhouette in a pattern cutting book, and again, like, this is where my bespoke one-on-one tailoring and garment and costume manufacture comes in. When you look at this shape in a pattern cutting book, it looks nothing like the knitted shapes that are created. It's a lot more shaped, and it draws from, you know, sleeve heads and sleeve shapes, which are quite complex shapes, even in a so-called simple silhouette. So the reason that knitting gets away, or hand knitting gets away with overly simplifying pattern cutting so much is because of the stretch of fabric, in my opinion, A, but also B, because, you know, maybe when people are knitting stuff, they are not thinking necessarily about fit, like 10 out of 10 out of fit, like the fit is maybe not always up there, whereas when you're, you know, tailoring a garment, for instance, like the fit is the main thing that you think about. So because I think when you're hand knitting, you're thinking about texture, yarn, you know, the surface and so on and so forth. It's kind of like fit issues often get overlooked, or they go down in importance slightly. This is my observation. Let me know what you think, because I can't make sense of it otherwise, because, you know, yes, stretch has got a lot to do with it, and you know, the stretch of the knitted fabric, its give, its pliancy, its memory, that is very unique, and that's something that every knitter has to learn about. But also, again, when you're then producing knitwear at volume, en masse, you also have to take that into account quite a lot. But I think that as a knitting designer, it's interesting to think about both. And because my formal training has come from pattern cutting, and then knitting is my like kind of self-taught skill, I'm very naturally putting those things together. That was a lot of chat. Anyway, so one of the reasons why things take me so long is basically because I overthink things in a way that I wouldn't have done if I was, you know, if I didn't have all of that training in a way. And it's sort of, sometimes I am my own worst enemy in that sense. But yes, so I've created these, this interesting shape. So like sometimes, for instance, I see people that have made sweater sleeves and there's no shaping at all in the arm, and then they get a puffed shape by doing like a big decrease at the wrist, and that creates this extremely straight silhouette through the arm, which I didn't want to do. So I've got a very interesting shape which creates all of this nice and lovely volume, and it's cropped. It doesn't have any shaping through the waist, so just wanted to keep things simple, and it's got this shoulder and neck shaping, which honestly was such a headache. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I say it took me days to calculate. But I'm hoping that going forward, you know, I'm definitely going to have to design a couple more drop sleeve things. And yeah, hopefully that people still like this silhouette, because it's definitely fun to make, and it's so nice to do. You know, as much as I loved, you know, as much as I have no problem with seaming garments, there is just something so wonderfully satisfying about, you know, casting off at the sleeves, stitching in a few ends quickly, and then just pulling the sweater on, which is what I've done today. So yeah, this is Cloudgazing. I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. The yarn was gifted to me by La Bien Aimée, and this design was really an opportunity to play with and show off their merino boucle base, which I shall grab. And one more thing to say about this stitch pattern is that it's actually full of holes. So like when my friend saw it, my friend's a crocheter, and she was like, oh, it kind of looks and feels like crochet, but it's knit. And it's definitely got that kind of chunkiness to it that crochet has. So here is the boucle, and a few people have asked me, you know, if they can't get hold of the boucle or they don't want to use it for whatever reason, what can they do as a substitute? And you basically want to use yarn that's hairy and fluffy. So you can definitely do a mohair silk, or you can do one of the kind of brushed alpaca or blown alpaca yarns. Just think about hairiness, and that is what, you know, will give you a comparable effect. But obviously the boucle itself, it produces quite a unique texture. I've described it as spongy, like a sponge cake or a mattress, and I think that is pretty apt. So it's quite fun. It's nice to play around with at least once, I think, in your knitting life. I feel like there's so many different types of yarns, and it's really nice to just, you know, try all of them once at least. Yeah, so that was Cloudgazing. I feel like breathless having gone on this like rambling rant about pattern cutting. But that's why you're here, right? What was I going to say? Oh, Cloudgazing. All right, so it's going to be released in a couple of weeks. To get notified about the release, make sure again that you're signed up to my newsletter, because that is the only place where I will release introductory discounts and things like that. It's just for my subscribers and my dedicated readers. So head over there if you haven't done so already. And in terms of the other designs from the collection, I'm going to have to release them after I've handed in my PhD thesis, because I have had to, you know, I've mentioned this last video as well, I've had to really seriously just scale back on pretty much everything in my life in order to have the headspace to focus on my PhD. You know, I've cut back on, yeah, just so much. Life has been really boring at times, but then on the other hand, I've had to kind of really deal with my own mental health issues. I don't know what it is about writing a long sustained thing, doing a PhD. It's like you just end up confronting all of your demons because you've got nothing to distract you. Like there's no excuse behind anything. It's just you, and that's it. And yeah, it's been a really tough ride. And part of, to be honest with you, you know, a long time ago I did realise that like knitting was a displacement activity, because I was just knitting to distract myself from how poor my mental health was, and to distract myself from how awful I felt about my PhD and stuff like that. And obviously now I'm in a place where I'm like, look, I just need to finish it. I just need to move past this so I can get on with my life. Yeah, so I'm doing a lot less knitting. Let me know if you can relate to that at all. So on that note, I had this idea to take a slightly different approach to the Crimson Stitchery, at least for the next couple of months, which is that I would really like to help you guys by answering any knitting questions and knitting problems that you have. So in previous years, I've done like an Ask Me Anything kind of video, maybe once a year or so. Within that, I tend to get a lot of personal questions mixed in with knitting and technical questions. And sometimes I answer the technical questions, but sometimes I add them to my tutorials list of tutorials that I need to film at some point. But to be honest with you, that list has got quite large and overwhelming, and I think it's going to be most helpful if I can just understand what are the kind of queries that people are having about knitting now. And, you know, again, this is like my thing about trying to just like do things in a more timely manner rather than letting them build up into this huge thing and then getting really intimidated and just being too slow. So please help me to help myself. Yes, so I would love to know what your knitting questions are. Not so much the personal ones, like maybe we'll do one of those over the summer or something like that. But I would love to know how I can help you with your knitting related questions. And I've been putting a couple of polls up recently. You might have seen or participated in them. I had one on YouTube and one on Instagram where I basically asked for some guidance on how long those videos should be. Like, should I just answer one question per video, or should I answer a few? And the overall impression I got from people was that you guys would like to just have a slightly longer video, and I can totally relate to that because there's so much short content out there, isn't there now? Like, it's so short form and you're just being blasted at it from all angles, and I personally find it quite overwhelming, so I can definitely relate. And you know, as you guys know, I've got the gift of the gab. Like, if there's something to say, I will take a million years and go around all of the houses to say it. But hopefully in a way that, you know, is, well, hopefully it's entertaining. But hopefully in a way that is actually going to be helpful to you, and just to it would be really good for me to be able to kind of direct my knowledge in a kind of more succinct and helpful manner, for lack of a better word. So please do send me your knitting related questions. I have made a form to collect these responses. I will put a link down below in the show notes, so please do feel free to just pop in a question there at any time. But that's going to be the best place to do it, because again, it will collect them all in one place, as opposed to like some on Instagram, some on YouTube, some in an email, so on and so forth. Especially because on Instagram, I don't get all of the notifications. So, you know, if you've messaged me or if you've commented, they don't always show up. I don't know what's happening. Like, I've done an update, I've reset my phone, blah, blah, blah. It's just not a reliable way. And I've actually put on my Instagram profile, like, don't send me messages, send me an email. Because it's not you're not guaranteed to get hold of me, basically. Who knows why. So I've made a dedicated form for questions, and do pop one in and hopefully I will be able to help you. And yeah, I also wondered whether I should add in a question segment in this podcast, or if I should just do separate videos. And again, I'm inclined to separate videos because, you know, short and sweet, as I've already discussed in this episode. So, to summarise, I've made this sweater. I would also like to help you guys with any knitting problems that you have. Get the newsletter, get on the Patreon, join us for knit night, and yeah, send me your questions in the form. Alright, so the last thing that I'm gonna chat about this month is to do a reading with you guys. So let me grab that book. What I'm going to be reading from is a short passage from this book, Having and Being Had by Eula Biss. And this is a book that I have actually already recommended in my newsletter, because I chanced upon this author, and she's an essayist and a poet, American essayist and a poet. Like, that's like a very American contemporary creative writing thing to be. And yeah, I chanced upon her, looked her up, read this book, and this is her latest book. I was just so taken by it. So basically, this person is, she primarily writes nonfiction. She works at a university as a kind of creative writing teacher. I think she's got an MA, but she's not got a PhD, but she writes a lot about writing. And obviously I'm writing my thesis, and you know, working in a university, I also work as what's called an associate lecturer, or an hourly paid lecturer. And you know, whenever I've like told my family, what are you doing these days? Oh, I'm finishing my PhD and I'm working as a university lecturer. Everyone's very like, wow, wow, wow. But it's not. It's basically a 0 hours contract job. The contract is not officially called a 0 hours contract, but that's basically what it is in reality. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. If you're curious about it, just Google like what is the pay for adjunct professors, because adjunct is the American term, and like it seems like American academics have been the most vociferous on how terrible this system is online, and you'll get a lot of stuff about how it's not a great job at all. So I can basically relate a lot to what she's writing about. But you know, you don't have to be in that position, obviously. It's just that's why it was so captivating for me. But the reason that I liked it so much is because of the way that she approaches writing about academic sources. And she does it in quite a sort of, it's unconventional for me to read this. It's maybe not unconventional if you read a lot of non-fiction creative essays, but it's the way that she'll read an academic book, absorb some of its ideas and kind of tell it back to us, the reader, in a way that it's like you understand what that person's ideas were. She's just made it so relevant. She writes with a really, really, really dry wit. Like, it's so dry. She's pretty self-deprecating. And it's funny because when I read a few reviews of this book online, you know, you should never really trust online reviews, but sometimes you just do anyway. You just keep scrolling and scrolling. And then, like, some of the reviews are like, I don't get this woman. She's just complaining about, like, being a middle-class white lady, and she's just showing off about all of these things that she had. And it's like, they completely miss the irony. She's, like, totally taking the mickey out of herself. So she basically wrote this book called Having and Being Had. It's about commodity capitalism and it's a Marxist inquiry, but please don't let that put you off, because that really would have put me off. Just don't let it. And like, you don't have to agree, you don't have to be into like, I'm not into Marxism. You don't have to agree. Yeah, I'm not into Marxism. I'm more from like a material culture, objects, and the social, how objects are you know, embedded with social relations and social values kind of perspective, like more from anthropology. So yeah, anthropology, sociology, cultural studies side, not the Marxist side, but I know it, I see it, I get it. I just take a different approach in my own work. So yeah, don't let it put you off. It's really interesting. All right, I'm going to stop like raving about it and just read you a little bit, and then we'll talk about it some more. So I'm reading a short passage, and all of the passages are very short, from like 2/3 of the way through the book. Eat a peach. I don't believe that what you think you do is worthless, my sister says. I don't, I just mean financially worthless. Writing poetry doesn't usually produce money for most people. Free verse is doubly free in that it is unfettered by metre and it has no market value. I can pass as a writer who is not a poet, and my writing sometimes has market value, but it has never paid the rent. The money I earn from writing is unpredictable, more like an occasional windfall than a salary. But I don't measure the worth of my work in dollars. You should clarify that, my sister says. Is it too scary? She asks. She's not talking to me, she's talking to her son, who's watching James and the Giant Peach. Eat a peach was the slogan John wrote for a banner that hung above a table of peaches in the local food co-op of the town where we met. He did marketing for the co-op until he quit to work on his writing. It's an Allman Brothers album, John explained when I laughed. I still think it's funny. Not just the slogan hanging above a pile of ripe peaches, but the very idea of marketing peaches, which the slogan seemed to mock. Aren't peaches their own advertisement? The reward of art is not fame or success, but intoxication, Cyril Connolly writes. And that is why so many bad artists are unable to live without it. The value of what I do is that it makes me feel alive, I told my sister. Even more than alive. She isn't satisfied with this. Art has value for people who aren't artists, she insists. You should explain that value. Is it too scary? She asks again. I think it's inherently scary, I say, being inside the pit of a peach, rolling along, not knowing where you're going, getting carried across the ocean by birds. It's a life marked by uncertainty and absurdity, the life of an artist. Maybe the value of art to artists and everyone else is that it upends other value systems. Art unmakes the world made by work. Do I dare to eat a peach? Asks J. Alfred Prufrock in his love song. Do I dare to eat a peach, he asks, after indecisions and revisions, after toasts and teas, after a life measured out in coffee spoons, and after having already asked, do I dare disturb the universe? Women shouldn't have to work for nothing, I tell my sister, and neither should artists, but I feel the way some women once felt about the wages for housework movement. If I were paid wages for the work of making art, then everything I do would be monetized. Everything I do would be subject to the logic of this economy. And if art became my job, I'm afraid that would disturb my universe. I would have nothing unaccountable left in my life, nothing worthless, except for my child. My sister's son is shrieking now. She says, "It's too scary." The end of that passage. Wow. So hopefully you can see why I enjoyed this book so much. I literally read it twice. I've told everyone I liked it. I told you guys in my newsletter. I sent a copy to my friend who's an artist. Like technically, you know, every sentence is crafted very carefully. There's a lot of long sentences, but they have a lot of rhythm to them. And it's just the way that she switches in between, and you can follow her train of thought, but the way that the academic texts, you know, theory, about money and commodities and art are like interwoven with poetry, other songs, you know, memory. It's so well done. and it exists as a vignette, as like a story. She's talking to her sister's talking to her and the sister's child. And it's like there's so many different voices, like and people's thoughts like represented on the page, but yet like you're in her mind when you're reading it, and it's very natural the way it flows around and between and betwixt all of the different actors in this passage. It's complete in itself, but it also, you know, it's a direct response to the previous passage, and it leads on to the next one in a very nice way. And yeah, obviously, you know, what do we do when we try and make our art a job, or when we try and, you know, commoditize, when we try and turn something that, you know, the inherent value is abstract in a way because it's intangible, and maybe it's not valuable because it brings in more money. You know, what do we do when we try and make a living off that, or when we try and take that seriously, or what, you know. She's basically grappling in this book with like stuff that I've been struggling with my entire life, which is, it basically like boils down to, what do you do if you're a creative person? Do you do what you love and turn it into a job? Because, you know, that's what I did in my, you know, 10 years ago, my early 20s. Turned it into a job, it became a job, destroyed all of the creativity and took the joy out of the thing. Or do you just keep it for yourself, you know, and completely divorce it from financial value? Which is something that I'm basically coming to 10 years later in my early 30s, as I, you know, end of my PhD is approaching. I received a scholarship for the PhD. It's been the first time in my entire life that I've not had to worry about paying the bills. Like, my scholarship is extremely modest, like it's basically minimum wage, and I've had to be extremely frugal to be able to live on that. But just knowing that like my expenses are going to be covered has removed so much anxiety from my life, you know, especially, you know, growing up in a situation where we didn't know, you know, money was pretty scarce, and we had some really hard times. So yeah, just like having 5 years in which I haven't had to worry about, you know, where's the money going to come from. I can just do my studies, even though they've been horrendous, but like, you know, I'm coming to the end of that. The stipend's coming to an end on Halloween, October the 31st. That is my hand-in date, my submission date, my funding end date. It's all ending. It's kind of scary. Is it scary? It's scary. And I'm trying to tell myself, like, I've still got nearly 6 months. I'm going to finish my thesis. I'm going to do it. I'm going to look for a job. Increasingly feeling like I'm gonna leave academia so that I can, you know, write, you know, I need to write my book, I need to write my articles, I want to do a knitting book, I want to carry on with the Crimson Stitchery, but, you know, what am I going to do to to earn money? Who knows? But reading this it kind of places me, because it's a Marxist take in this book. It's all about kind of structures and systems, so it's kind of reassuring to feel like as an individual sometimes you don't actually have that much choice. You actually have a lot less control than you think, and there's something quite freeing in that you kind of can only make the best decisions that you can do at the time. So anyway, let me know what you think of that passage. I'm going to wrap this up now. And yeah, please keep sending me good thoughts about finishing my PhD thesis. I feel like I've got through like the worst part of the rewriting, and I'm optimistic that it's going to be easier. I'm like editing now. I'm optimistic. I've got like a chapter every 2 weeks basically to send off now. So it's like really, like things are really cranking ahead. And meanwhile, I'm going to be releasing this sweater pattern, so I need to get the photos for that, and it's going to be really fun. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to everybody who supports the Crimson Stitchery on Patreon if you enjoy it. If you enjoy this channel, please do head over to patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery. Don't forget we've got our knit night coming up. And thank you to my supporters at the Crimson Queen's tier, which is the highest level. Thank you, Angie Scheitel, for your ongoing support. It is much appreciated. For everybody watching, don't forget you can send me a query, a knitting query, by filling out the relevant form. It will be in the show notes below. And I'm going to wrap up here, and I will see you again at the Crimson Stitchery sometime soon. Take care, happy knitting.